I am 81 years old. For 47 of those years, I was an elder in the Jehovah's Witnesses, a congregation leader in Dayton, Ohio. I conducted meetings, organized the door-to-door ministry, and sat on judicial committees that determined whether brothers and sisters remained or were formally shunned. I believed with absolute certainty that this was God's one true organization on earth. That certainty allowed me to transfer a child abuser to another congregation rather than call the police. It allowed me to hold parents' hands while their 9-year-old daughter died, refusing a blood transfusion, and tell them they were honoring Jehovah. It allowed me to stand at the pulpit and read my own son's name as disfellowshipped, then go home and eat alone without tears, because I was faithful. If you are inside the Witnesses today, or if someone you love is inside, please stay with me. I am asking you to witness what an organization takes from a man over decades, while he believes he's doing what God requires. I am 81 years old, and what I am about to tell you took a lifetime to find the courage to say. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. My parents were not particularly religious. Church at Easter, perhaps. The kind of faith that lives in the calendar rather than in the soul. When I was 34 years old, a young couple came to my door on a Saturday morning. I had nothing planned. I let them in because they were friendly, and because, if I am honest about it, I was lonely. They were Jehovah's Witnesses. They gave me a New World Translation Bible and a copy of the Watchtower magazine. They came back the following Saturday, and every Saturday after that. Within 2 years, I had been baptized. Within 7 years, I was appointed as an elder of the congregation. Nothing I can say will fully capture how it felt to know the truth. That is what we called it. Not a religion, not a denomination, not even simply a church, but the truth. Everyone outside the congregation were worldly people, moving through life in spiritual darkness, and we were the ones who could see. That sense of being chosen, set apart, belonging to something that would outlast everything the world was building. It goes very, very deep. These organizations do not offer you small things. They offer you certainty and purpose and an unshakable identity. You do not notice from inside what all of that costs until much later. My wife, Margaret, joined within the first year. She was better at the door-to-door work than I was, warmer, more patient at the door, able to make a stranger feel that what we were offering was worth pausing to hear. We had one son, Daniel, born 3 years after my baptism. He grew up entirely within the truth from his first memories. By age 8, he was accompanying me in the Saturday morning field service, standing beside me on the front porches of Dayton's neighborhoods, while I explained to people why their holidays were rooted in paganism, why their churches were part of what the Bible calls Babylon the Great, why they needed what we were bringing to their door. He listened carefully to everything. He believed. He was a serious, thoughtful boy who studied the Bible harder than most adults I knew in our congregation. I was proud of him in a way I never quite had words for. I believed that pride was Jehovah looking at what I had built. I was wrong about most of that. As an elder, I sat on judicial committees. 3 elders, a private room, a member of the congregation on trial for immorality, for apostasy, for smoking, for associating with someone who had already been disfellowshipped. We heard the matter and deliberated. If the person was found guilty and unrepentant, they were disfellowshipped. Their name announced from the Sunday podium in a brief, formulaic sentence. From that moment, no one in the congregation, not their oldest friends, not their parents, not their own children, was permitted to have any contact with them. We call this Jehovah's discipline, a spiritual protection for the health of the congregation. I participated in dozens of these committees over 47 years and believed every time that I was performing a necessary and loving act. The most important thing I can tell you about how this system works: they do not ask you to be cruel. They simply ask you to call cruelty by other names, and they supply all the vocabulary you will ever need. In 1975, I believed Armageddon was imminent. The organization had not declared it a formal prophecy, but every publication, every assembly, every visit from the circuit overseer was saturated with the implication. Brothers and sisters sold houses. A man in my congregation sold the business he had spent 15 years building. Families deferred their futures because they believed there was no future to plan for. When 1975 came and went without incident, the organization explained that some members had placed too much personal emphasis on the timing, that it was a matter of individual expectation, not organizational teaching. I stood at the Kingdom Hall podium and delivered this explanation to my congregation with a steady and confident voice. I had a particular gift for that, I realize now, for taking something that should have caused a rupture and making it sound like a perfectly natural development. In the spring of 1988, a 14-year-old girl in my congregation reported through an older sister that her 17-year-old brother had been touching her in ways that were wrong. I was informed. I did precisely what the organization's written procedures required. I called the branch office in Brooklyn. The guidance was clear and specific. For a judicial matter to proceed, 2 witnesses to the offense were needed. A single accusation, even a credible one, was not sufficient grounds for involving civil authorities. I was to handle the matter spiritually. I spoke to the boy, whose name was Kevin, who denied everything. I told his sister that Jehovah sees all things and that Kevin would answer to God in his time. Kevin continued to attend meetings. About 2 years later, his family relocated to a congregation in Findlay, Ohio. I completed the standard transfer paperwork. I included no information about what his sister had reported. In 2002, I received a phone call from an elder in Columbus. Kevin had been reported there, 2 young children. The elder asked me if I had ever had any concerns about Kevin during his time in my congregation. I told him no. I hung up the telephone and sat at my kitchen table for a very long time without moving. I have not spoken of this until this moment. There was also Sarah. She was 9 years old. Her father was a ministerial servant in my congregation, one step below elder, a devoted and earnest man. She was diagnosed with leukemia in 1991. Her treatment required blood transfusions. Her parents refused because our doctrine on blood was absolute. To receive another person's blood was to violate God's sacred law. I visited them in the hospital every week. I read scriptures with them. I told them their faithfulness was a testimony to the entire congregation and that Jehovah would honor it. Sarah died on a Thursday afternoon in October. I preached at her funeral and called her death a witness to Jehovah's standards. Every day since that October, not every week, not occasionally, every single day, every morning, I have thought about Sarah. I also noticed over the decades that the organization changed its teachings without ever acknowledging error. Doctrines that had been declared absolute and final would be quietly revised. New light, they called it. God progressively revealing deeper understanding to the governing body. But new light, observed from inside over 40 years, is very difficult to distinguish from simple institutional correction. A doctrine was wrong, and instead of admitting wrongness, the organization announced a refinement. Something had been misunderstood, had required further study, had now been clarified. I buried each of these observations under the weight of everything I had already invested. 47 years of Saturday mornings, dozens of committees, a son who had grown up believing every single word I had taught him. Daniel was 28 when he told me about Jennifer. He sat at my kitchen table and said, "Dad, I'm in love with a woman. Her name is Jennifer. She's not in the truth." He knew exactly what I would say. I gave him 3 months to end the relationship. He did not. He told me they were getting married. I told him I could not stand beside him in that choice. He said he understood and thanked me before he left. That thank you is the detail I have returned to most often. That he thanked me while I was informing him I would announce his social death to everyone who had known him since childhood. He married Jennifer in June of 2003. I was not there. The following Sunday, I stood at the podium of the Kingdom Hall and read the announcement. Daniel Matthews is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. 8 words. The congregation understood precisely what they meant. No contact. Not from the friends he had grown up with. Not from the neighbors who had watched him become a man. Not from his mother. Not from me. That afternoon, Margaret said, "Robert, I want to call him." I said, "We cannot." She said, "He is our son." I said, "He made his choice, Margaret. This is what faithfulness asks of us." She wept all night. I sat at the kitchen table with my Bible and did not allow myself to cry, because I told myself what I was feeling was not grief, but the weight of righteousness. I want you to hear this precisely. They take the grief that any human parent would rightfully feel at losing a child, and they rename it. They give it the word faithfulness. They make your suffering into evidence of your love for God, and you believe them because you have been believing them for decades. Days after the announcement, an envelope arrived in the mail. By its thickness and shape, I could tell it was a photograph. I wrote "Return to Sender" on the face of the envelope and placed it back in the mailbox without opening it. Margaret watched from the kitchen window and said nothing at all. Margaret died in 2013. She never spoke to Daniel again after that Sunday. In her final hours, she gripped my hand and said, "Tell Danny I love him." I nodded. I did not call. I told myself I would call when the grief had settled, when I was stronger, when the time was right. Later became a year, became 5, became 8. His children were born. I learned through a neighbor there were 3, a daughter and 2 boys. I did not ask for more than that. I ate Sunday dinners alone. I read the Watchtower magazine. I maintained my faithfulness to an organization that had taken everything and called the taking a gift. I had a heart attack in February of 2020. I lay on my kitchen floor for nearly 20 minutes before I reached my phone. In the hospital the night before surgery, a nurse named Patricia came to check my vitals and stayed because she could see I was frightened. She asked if she could read something to me. I told her I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses and did not receive spiritual instruction from other sources. She understood but sat down anyway and picked up the Gideon Bible from the nightstand, the one I had been deliberately ignoring. She read the 23rd Psalm. I started to correct her about the translation. She kept reading. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." Something in her voice stopped me. She was not performing or competing or trying to win anything. I had not been near faith like that, unstrategic, unburdened, with nothing to prove, in 47 years. After surgery, alone in the ICU, I opened the Gideon Bible and turned to the Gospel of John, not filtered through any Watchtower study article. I read through that night. When I reached John 11:35, Jesus wept. I placed the Bible on my chest and lay still for a very long time. 2 words, the shortest verse in the Bible. I had been an elder for 47 years, and no one had ever preached to me about a God who weeps, a God who stands outside a tomb and weeps alongside those who are mourning. I had been taught exclusively about a God of standards and requirements, who would preserve the loyal and destroy those who did not measure up. I had never been introduced to the God who cries with us. I called Daniel from the hospital room. He answered on the 3rd ring. Neither of us spoke for almost a full minute. Then I said, "Danny, it's Dad." He said, "I know, Dad." I said, "I'm sorry." He said, "I know, Dad." We arranged to meet after I was discharged. He came to a diner near his home. He brought Jennifer, who was far kinder to me than anything I had earned. He brought their 3 children, a daughter who was 15 and 2 boys, 13 and 10. They looked at me with careful, measured politeness, as if they were meeting someone new. I was a stranger to them. I am still, in most ways, a stranger. We have met several times in the years since. They are slowly becoming less cautious around me. I do not know how much time I have left to stop being a stranger. When I came home from the hospital, I was putting something away, and I found the envelope in a kitchen drawer. 17 years, and I had kept it without being able to say why. I opened it carefully. It was their wedding photograph. Daniel in a gray suit. Jennifer with small white flowers woven into her hair. They are both looking at each other and laughing at something I will never know. They are completely, entirely, unmistakably happy. I held that photograph for a long time before I could set it down. I am telling you this so you understand exactly what is taken from you inside that organization. It gives you certainty and community and the feeling of being chosen by God. In return, it takes your capacity to love anyone who does not comply. It took my son's wedding, 17 years of Sunday dinners, and my wife's last request. Jesus Christ, the one in the Gospel of John, the one who stood outside a tomb and wept, who said, "Come to me, all who are weary," never asked for any of that. He never asked you to choose an organization over your child. He asked only that you love. I learned this at 79 years old, lying in a hospital bed in Dayton, Ohio. I am still learning what it costs to have waited that long.